Mórí Vermagin, Jas Vehan Sohliv and Glanty, and particularly Joe Ganamagadas and Gura Veharashliv. And to be asked to speak on a topic so close to my heart is particularly nice, because after all, even since I was a child, I've been kind of trying to predict the outcomes of general elections. I mean, after all, I was only 9 years of age when I was canvassing the nuns in school. And our home, of course, was the Fianna Fáil election headquarters, and where everybody else in Tipperary, their sport was hurling, ours was actually politics. So having grown up with it, I have to say it was easy in those days to predict the outcome of the general election, because it was either going to be an overall majority, remember those days, for Fianna Fáil, or, as Frank said, the Fine Gael and Labour coalition. But then along comes the independents and the deals and the small parties and the alliances and the new groupings and Noel's gene pool and the right and the left and the extreme left and the opinion polls and the choices, which makes it absolutely impossible to predict the outcome of the next general election. And over the last number of years, commentators have tended to use kind of natural disasters to describe elections and the outcomes of elections. So the 2007 general election was the earthquake that never happened. The 2011 general election was truly seismic for Fine Gael and Labour and Sinn Féin as they broke all their previous records. And for Fianna Fáil, we suffered a negative tsunami of vote and seat lost. Now, if we're to use that terminology for the next election, I suspect somehow that the results won't be so much a tornado as a twister. And this morning, that's what we're being asked to look at and to discuss. Will we have new politics or will we have unstable governance? Now, unlike the political pundits, I'm only a politician, I'm not a prophet. I don't know what the result will be. However, I do think that the campaign will be new politics for a number of reasons. The first thing is you're going to have far more women seeking election. And that is going to impact on the campaign, it's going to impact on the discussion, on the topics that are being discussed, and it's going to lead to a far broader, wider debate on issues, which I think is to be welcomed. Secondly, social media is going to have a very big impact on the next election. It's going to engage voters in a new way, but it's also going to challenge the parties and the candidates to come up with immediate responses. So at the time you could wait for the 6 o'clock news to know who has said what today. But now you have to have the story and the response immediately. And that's really going to be challenging. And even the traditional media are going to have to balance their coverage and their time in different ways because we have so many different groupings contesting the election. Thirdly, there's at least a possibility, and hopefully a good possibility, that young people will engage more in this election. Because as a result of the referendum, they've now seen that by being involved in politics, that you can actually bring about change. And finally, those who believe that protesting is the way to go, barricading women into their cars, abusing our president, or spitting at the Gardaí, maybe they'll realise that change at an election time comes about by casting your vote in the ballot box. So the campaign itself will be new politics. But the one thing I am sure about after the campaign is that when the votes are counted, the Irish people will want stable governance. And yes, it will become a numbers game, but good governance and stable government involves far more than just numbers. It involves political parties with an effective whip system, and here I'll agree with Frank, an agreed policy platform, and leaders who don't have to like each other, but who respect and trust each other and who are respected and trusted. As of last Wednesday, or as of 11 o'clock today, there were 10 political parties represented in the Oireachtas. There's 11 in Dublin City Council. There are many more in local authorities around the country. The political parties are successful the world over because, contrary to popular belief, political parties bring chaos that would bring order to the chaos that would otherwise reign. Yeah, sometimes that happens too. Political parties bring order to the chaos that would reign if parliaments were populated by parish pump populists. It is the collective nature of a political party that ensures that national priorities and not local ones that prevail. Not local and not sectional interests. And that is really important when you're talking about government. It goes back to Charles Stewart Parnell. I mean, he was the one that brought the Irish Parliamentary Party together to sit, act and vote together, and succeeded in getting the first Home Rule Bill through. So it's knowing that you can depend on a majority of TDs. That is what allows for policy to be implemented. Last night we heard Michael McDowell, and over the last number of months we've heard people talk about the whip system. Independents don't have one. Smaller parties are going to relax it, others are going to reduce the power of it. But the reality is stable government needs the discipline of the whip system in order to survive and to achieve anything. If I could misquote a terrible saying, spare the whip and spoil the party, because that's what makes the party system work. And given that there hasn't been a single party government in Ireland for nearly 40 years, since 1977, I think we can presume that the next election will produce some form of alliances. If you have political parties working together, there's a presumption that after you have your programme for government, well, at least then the votes will be there. And that gives stability and it gives certainty. But a government that's trying to depend on independence will have to negotiate and bargain and even plead for every measure. Now, I had the pleasure of being government chief whip between 2002 and 2004. I was the first female whip. You have no idea the number of men, male TDs, who told me they were looking forward to being whipped by a woman. I had my very own 50 Shades of Grey. No. That government was a Fianna Fáil PD government supported by independents. The previous government was dependent on the independents. Everyone had their own list of demands, the issue to be resolved while they held the government to ransom. Now, in fairness to Jackie and to Mildred and to Harry and to Tom, what they were looking for was a road, a school, a bridge, a mast. They weren't exactly things that were going to affect the debt-GDP ratio. In fact, in Jackie's case, it was far more important that we gave him the good news before we gave it to John O'Donoghue. But imagine a scenario after the next election where the government is formed maybe depending on 10 or 15 or 20 independents, not only with their own demands, but a list that is as much national as local. One of them wants to get rid of NAMA, another wants to abolish water charges, another wants to repeal the 8th. If you give in to all of those demands, that's where chaos can reign. And every bill, every measure would have to be negotiated. Every budget would have to be compromised. And that is exactly the political instability that we don't need. It was the political instability in the early 80s that held back economic recovery and held back social progress. But it would appear that even the independents are beginning to realise that there's strength in numbers, because we've now 2 new political parties who have emerged out of those independents, and we have at least 2 independent alliances. I serve on Dún Laoghaire County Council. We have 5 independents. We're barely a year there, and they have split already. We have the independents, and we have the 3 Shane Ross independents. So what is an independent? But what I do know is that stable government and coherent policies cannot emerge from groupings such as this. And it's all very well them just coming together. But in order to achieve anything, and in order to have value, they have to have a shared purpose. They have to have a shared vision, and not just coming together for the sake of trying to get into power. It is the shared vision that creates political parties, and that's what's necessary for stable government. Now, even within the political parties, the whip system can actually be very challenging. Imagine trying to get the fellow in your own party who was passed over for promotion to turn up every day for a vote. Or even worse, the fellow who's just been sacked as a minister, and get him to be there as a backbencher. Or consider the TD with the local difficulty, or more likely, the one with an issue of conscience on a social issue. And of course, there absolutely should be room within the Irish political system for allowing people to vote their own way on matters of conscience or matters of life or death. That wouldn't weaken the whip system. It would actually be far more honest than what's happening at the moment. TDs don't leave their conscience behind when they're elected to the All-Ireland, and neither should they be expected to. But no, life and death does not include your local hospital, your local factory or your local road. But conscience is something that should be allowed for in our Irish political system. Within the system of Parliament as well, the whips have a relationship not just with their own party, but also with each other. Party leaders play a different game. They're playing with their audience. What we saw in Greece recently, it was the Parliament that had to get the measures through. And it works best with political parties. But it's a programme for government which I believe is a really essential part for stable government. And that involves negotiation and it involves compromise. Now, it happens at two different stages. It happens immediately after an election, where you take the manifestos where there's common purpose and you draw them together. And it happens again sort of mid-term, where there may be new priorities that have emerged. One of my political experiences was to renegotiate the programme for government with the Fianna Fáil Green government. At the time, Miriam Lord wrote that Fianna Fáil sent 2 bother boys and a boot girl to negotiate, which was a terrible thing to call Noel Dempsey, Dermot Ahern and myself. WikiLeaks reported that I told the US ambassador, if some of the Greens had their way, the programme for government would emphasise hares, stags and badgers while everyone else in the country is drowning in this economy. Now, of course, I wouldn't confirm a WikiLeaks. Ambassador, I'm not asking you to confirm that I'm a spy. But if you look at that programme for government, you will find that there are elements in it that mightn't traditionally have appeared on a Fianna Fáil list of priorities, such as phasing out fur farming over 3 years, and the one I particularly like, replacing the culling of badgers with a more effective and humane method of control. I'm really glad for the badgers. But these are where issues and compromises are reached in drawing programmes for government together, because it is one of the most important political documents. It's negotiated with trust, it's negotiated with respect, and it is implemented. Of course there's walkouts, there's table thumping, there's red line issues, but at the end of the day, that sets out the economic and social direction of the country for the next few years. What will be in the next programme for government? Well, what needs to be in it are prioritising homelessness and mortgage distress and childcare and quality education. And yes, Frank is right, people want the deficit reduced and they want jobs. More than anything else, they want fairness. That's what they want brought back into the next government and into planning for the next number of years. Everyone should be benefiting from the economic recovery. And there is no doubt that there is the two-tier recovery. And what we want to see in the next government and in negotiating that programme for government is that those 2 tiers converge. That will take strong leadership. It will take strong leadership to keep a government together, a leader who has support of his own party and the respect of others. But in Ireland we have a long tradition of rallying around the leader. In many cases, and to some degree still today, the leader is more important than the party. Like when you think of, in England, it's Labour or Conservative, largely. In America, it's the Republicans and the Democrats. Irish people have tended the leader more than the philosophy. When you think of the mass meetings of Daniel O'Connell or the rallies of Parnell or the meetings of De Valera, they're all proof of this fascination. Over the years, we have been asked to let Lamass lead on, bring back Jack, to make it happen with Albert, to follow the young leader for a young country. That was before we had a lot done and more to do. I'm invited to be part of Bertie's team. And do you remember the one where Gilmore for Taoiseach? I think Eamon Gilmore would like to forget that one. No. But the focus on the leader in Ireland is always emphasised by posters and slogans and banners and even songs. Right? The leaders' debate on RTE, TV3, TG Cahir, Gaeilge, Agus Béarla, they all continue this fascination and this interest in the leader. Opinion polls always ask about the popularity of the leader, and we saw even in yesterday's opinion poll, the popularity of someone like Micheál Martin was way ahead of the popularity of the party. So Irish people put a lot of faith in their leaders, and good government actually results from good leadership and the leaders trusting each other as well. Bertie Ahern and Mary Hanafin worked very well together. Albert Reynolds and Dick Spring didn't, because they didn't trust each other. So when the Irish people put their trust in the political parties, they're entitled to have that trust repaid. And by the end of the last government, we in Fianna Fáil, we had lost that trust. We'd lost the trust of the Irish people. But then we got a campaign where Fine Gael and Labour made promises that they didn't need to make. We continually now hear the extreme left trying to sell a message of protest and opposition with absolutely no solutions. So the lesson of the next election, which might sound obvious, but it's particularly true now after all that we've been through with political parties, with my own and others, is don't make false promises. Don't raise expectations needlessly of the Irish people, and don't let them down when you get into government. But if there's one thing certain in the next election, and that is nothing is certain. The latest opinion polls are showing that 30% of people are undecided as to who they're going to vote for. The current government have lost 43% of their support since the last election. It will be entirely unpredictable. So despite Joe asking us the question, I believe it's really difficult to answer. But you could picture the scene in Leinster House after the next election. We'll have the individual independents running around Leinster House like minions going, me, 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 me. You'll have independent alliances morphing into political parties, realising perhaps there's more success than that. We'll have the newest party wandering around looking for a leader because they suddenly realise that 3 into 1 won't go. We'll have the smaller parties swimming in their gene pool looking for preferment. We'll have the larger parties saying it's for the good of the country. Thinking, is it for the good of the party? The scene has all the ingredients of political instability, but it can be avoided with decisive leadership, with strong political parties, and with a clear vision, not just for the future of Ireland, but of a fairer society, which is not always evident now. But once the people have spoken, they will not thank us if we fail to play the hand that they deal us. As of now, the bigger parties have all ruled out going into government with each other. Someone has to run the country. Someone has to reach the magic 79 seats. And when 100 women are elected in the next election, I bet you they will. Garmagov.